You're listening to White Trash Sports Center.
The betting odds coming into the 2017 NFL season had the Patriots the betting favorites to make it back to the Super Bowl come 2018. It was predicted the team would win 12 to 13 games and continue their dominance in the AFC. The NFC team that was supposed to meet them, the Cowboys, were the betting favorites, and the Falcons and the Packers close behind. The Philadelphia Eagles were 40-1 long shots, and most sites asked over or under on 8 wins for the team. The main question was if Carson Wentz could take another step and become a top 15 quarterback. The offensive and defensive lines were good, but they faced steep competition from the Cowboys and Giants. The Giants were picked fairly often as a dark horse NFC Super Bowl representative. The two teams with the worst odds were the Browns and the 49ers, who were both 300-1. With that being said, let's start with the NFC West and those 49ers and take a quick look at their season. Coming into the season, they were absolutely in a rebuilding situation. They announced John Lynch as their GM and Kyle Shanahan as their coach. Some notable pickups in the offseason were Jeremy Zutaw, Elvis Dumervil, Brian Hoyer, Pierre Garçon, Robbie Gould, Marquise Goodwin, Logan Paulson, Kyle Juszczyk, and Jeremy Curley. Their draft class included Solomon Thomas, Reuben Foster, C.J. Beathard, and George Kittle. That's a lot of people to pick up, and they played basically all those guys because they're rebuilding. Opening game of the season saw the Niners lose at home to the Panthers 23-3. Starting quarterback Brian Hoyer had an interception and a fumble. Next game saw them travel to Seattle to take on the Seahawks, who they played very tough. Starting running back Carlos Hyde had a very good game that Brian Hoyer, again, wasn't very good. He threw an interception and had less than 100 yards passing, and the Niners lost to Seattle 12-9. Then Hoyer started to play better, but San Francisco endured 3 straight, very close, tough losses to the Rams, Cardinals, and Colts. After the Colts game, they would release Navarro Bowman, a former 3-time Pro Bowler and 4-time All-Pro. He had played for the team since 2010. And when you look farther into Navarro Bowman, there is a Navarro Bowman rule. On a play which he suffered a season-ending injury, Bowman stripped Seahawks wide receiver Jermaine Kearse of the ball near the goal line and appeared to take over possession. However, the officials ruled the ball in possession of the Seahawks. Under the instant replay conditions at the time, the officials were not permitted to take a second look. On March 26, 2014, team owners approved a change that would allow the referees to review the recovery of a loose ball. A similar proposal to allow coaches to question any recovery using one of their challenges was voted down. Bowman would sign with the close-by Raiders and finish the season there. Going into the Redskins game, the Niners were 0-5. Hoyer stood at 4 TDs and 4 interceptions, but the real story here was how close the losses were. After losing by 20 opening day, the following 4 losses would be by 3, 2, 3, and 3. This game would be no different, a very close loss by 2. But this was the game where they made a change at quarterback to rookie C.J. Beathard. The next 2 games saw the team get absolutely blown out by the Cowboys and the Eagles, putting them at 0-8. Those 300-1 odds makers know their stuff. This was also the week that undoubtedly changed the 49ers' future. This was the week they traded for New England's backup quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo. They gave up their second-round pick for him, which could end up looking like an amazing trade for them. Brian Hoyer would be released, and he would sign with Garoppolo's former team. And also at this time, Pierre Garçon went to the IR. Game 9 was a loss at home to the Cardinals, where C.J. Beathard was still the quarterback. Then Week 10, it happened that the Niners actually won a game, albeit against an equally terrible Giants team, but they did it 31-21 to improve to 1-9 going into their bye week. Week 12 saw the Niners at home against the Seahawks. C.J. Beathard suffered an injury very late in the game. It was the last few minutes. He would be replaced by the man they traded for in Garoppolo. He would only throw the ball twice, but on the last play of the game, he threw a 10-yard touchdown to Lewis Murphy. Niners still lost 13-24. Garoppolo would start for the first time for the Niners at Soldier Field against the Bears and lead them to victory. He then started the rest of the games and led them to victory over the Texans, Titans, Jaguars, and Rams, 3 of those teams being playoff teams. San Francisco would finish 6-10, but now they have a bright outlook on their future. Recently, Garoppolo, who has never lost a game as a starter in the NFL, signed a 5-year, $137.5 million deal to stay with the 49ers and become the face of the franchise. The The Niners next year, as of this recording, are 25-1 to make the Super Bowl next season.
Also in the NFC West, the Cardinals took a step down, finishing 8-8 this season. They lost their star running back, David Johnson, in Week 1. They would trade for Adrian Peterson, and he would debut for the team in Week 6. The very next week, Carson Palmer would also be lost for the year with a broken arm. He would later retire. Also after the season, coach Bruce Arians would retire, so a lot of changes coming to the Arizona Cardinals this year. Moving on to the Seattle Seahawks, they finished 9-7 and missed the playoffs. They lost 3 of their last 4 games. Russell Wilson led the NFL in touchdown passes. It would have almost certainly have been Carson Wentz if it were not for his injury. This would also be the first time since 2011 they finished under 10 wins and had not made the playoffs.
The lone playoff team from the NFC West would be the Los Angeles Rams. With the new coaching staff and various players having great years, the Rams would finish 11-5. They opened their season with a blowout win over the Colts. Week 4 saw the Rams come back from a deficit to beat the Cowboys, many experts saying it was the upset of the year. 9 games in, and the Rams are sitting at 7-2. A win over the Saints in Week 12 assured them their first non-losing season since 2006. They would finish the year winning 4 of the final 6 games, locking down the number 3 seed in the playoffs. Unfortunately for the Rams, they would fall to defending NFC champs the Falcons in the first round, 13-26. With a young nucleus, the Rams should be here to stay for the foreseeable future. Bookies had their Super Bowl odds at 20-1. Switching over to arguably the best conference in terms of quality of teams in the race to first, the NFC South saw 3 teams make the playoffs, but that's not where we start. Tampa Bay was on HBO's Hard Knocks and was getting a lot of positive buzz heading into the year despite their kicking situation. Big offseason pickups were Chris Baker and Deshaun Jackson. They ended up having a bye their very first week due to Hurricane Irma. They won their first 2 out of 3 games with the lone loss in Week 2 to the Vikings, who ended up doing quite well for themselves in the end. Then the wheels fell completely off for Tampa as they endured 5 straight losses. Week 10 and 11 were bounce-back weeks as they got wins over the Dolphins and Jets. They were 4-6. Then came the second 5-game losing streak that would crush their hopes of a postseason. They finished the year with their lone division win over the Saints. They had 2 Pro Bowlers in Gerald McCoy and Quan Alexander.
The Carolina Panthers opened their season with 2 victories over the Niners and the Bills before running into a Saints team that just absolutely crushed them. The Panthers would get huge wins in weeks 4 and 5, a late win over the Patriots and another win over the Lions to improve to 4-1. 2 straight losses would follow, one not so bad to a very good Eagles team, the other to an atrocious Bears team. Now sitting at 4-3, the Panthers would reel off 4 straight wins to become 8-3 and solidify themselves as contenders once again. Even after trading wide receiver and reported good friend of the QB, Kelvin Benjamin. Another loss to the Saints would not deter this team as they would go on to win 3 straight against the Packers, Vikings, and the Buccaneers before dropping the last game of the season to the Falcons, who had a lot to play for. An 11-5 finish was good enough for second in the division, but 4th in the stacked NFC playoffs. They would play the Saints for the 3rd time this season in the playoffs, and just like the first 2 meetings, the Panthers would lose, ending their season.
Coming off a Super Bowl appearance the previous year, the Falcons were looked at as one of the favorites to make it back. They started the season by splitting the first 6 games of their season. All 3 games they won were against the NFC North, and all 3 games they lost were against the AFC East. After splitting the next 2, the Falcons finally found their stride, winning the following 3 straight, putting them at 7-4. The last 5 games of the season were not easy. They had wins against the Bucs, the Panthers, and a loss to the Vikings, and split games with the Saints. After defeating the Panthers, the Falcons would secure the number 6 seed in the playoffs, all the while finishing the year at 10-6. First up, they traveled to L.A. to play the Rams. And they stunned the young team by doubling them up 26-13. Being the number 6 seed meant their next game was against the number 1 seed, Philadelphia. It would end up being a hard-fought game with Atlanta having the lead at the half. The Eagles would come back and outscore the Falcons 6-0 in the second half to win the game 15-10, thus ending Atlanta's season. Next up is the team that ended up winning the highly competitive NFC South, the New Orleans Saints. Their big offseason signings were Adrian Peterson, Manti Te'o, and Ted Ginn. Their draft class ended up being a very impressive one, notably selecting Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk, Marcus Williams, we'll get to him later, and soon-to-be All-Pro Alvin Kamara. The season, however, did not start well at all. An opening season loss to the Vikings that saw Adrian Peterson play against his former team. Peterson rushed 6 times for 18 yards while having to set and watch Vikings rookie Dalvin Cook break his rookie debut rushing record. The following game was a 36-20 loss to the Patriots, who were coming off an opening season loss. Peterson had 8 rushes for 26 yards. The Saints' season would turn around in a big way as they would win the next 8 games. They easily beat both the Panthers and Dolphins going into their bye week. The only problem the Saints were having was with the recently signed Adrian Peterson. He was seen screaming at coaches and openly unhappy with his role. So during the bye week, they traded the former MVP to the Cardinals. He had 81 rushing yards through 4 weeks and was coming off 4 rushes for 4 yards in a game. Undeterred by the move, the Saints continued winning as they scored 52 on the Lions and watched on as Mark Ingram flourished and Alvin Kamara became a star in the NFL. The Packers, Bills, Bucks, Bears, and Redskins all fell to the Saints en route to their 8-2 record. A tough 6-point loss to the Rams snapped the streak before they won 3 of their last 5 games. Finishing 11-5, they would clinch not only the NFC South, but also the 4th seed in the playoffs. First round, they continued their dominance over the Carolina Panthers before facing the 2-seed Vikings. The game in Minnesota became an immediate classic, all due to one play. The Vikings held a 17-0 lead at the half before the Saints stormed back in the second half. Fast forward to the 4th quarter, with the Vikings hanging on to a 20-14 lead, the Saints were driving. With barely over 3 minutes left, Drew Brees throws a touchdown to Kamara, and after the extra point, grabbed their first lead 21-20. The Vikings received the ball and in 9 plays worked the ball far enough downfield to where Kai Forbath successfully kicks a 53-yard field goal. This puts Minnesota up 23-21. In those 9 plays, only 92 seconds went off the clock. Kickoff to the Saints. Minute 29 is on the clock and the Saints work the ball up the field. With 25 seconds left on the clock, kicker Will Lutz hits a 43-yard field goal to put New Orleans in front by 1. After a touchback, Minnesota had the ball. After a false start on the Vikings, they completed a pass to their own 39-yard line before taking their last timeout, 18 seconds to go. 2 incomplete passes later, and we are at 10 seconds to go in the game, Saints up by 1. Shotgun formation, Case Keenum throws a deep pass right side to Stephon Diggs. It's caught. And you remember that rookie Marcus Williams we were going to get to later? He lowers his head and shoulders and dives for the receiver's legs and tackles nothing but Casper in the grass. Stephon Diggs runs the rest of the way in, and with no time left, the Vikings win 29-24 on the last play of the game, a 61-yard pass. Can't find much of a tougher way to end the season except for maybe a massacre of a blowout.
So now we're going to shift gears to one of my favorite divisions, the AFC West. We're going to start with the Denver Broncos. Their season got off to a very promising start as they won 3 of their first 4. Week 5 was their bye week, and it did not serve the Broncos well at all. Coming out of the bye week, they lost 8 straight games in a row. Some of the scores were absolutely woeful. Lost 21-0 to the Chargers. Lost 51-23 to the Eagles. Lost 41-16 to the Patriots. Lost 35-9 to the Dolphins. A lot of these games were not even close at all. The quarterback carousel began as the Broncos rotated 3 quarterbacks, whether due to injury or just simply lack of production. Back-to-back wins over the Jets and the Colts put Denver at 5-9, but it was too little, too late to turn it around. They finished the season with back-to-back losses to the Redskins and the Chiefs. Broncos will really need to find a quarterback to produce if they want to reverse fortunes this next season. The Raiders announced they were moving to Las Vegas before the start of this season, and they would also be without iconic kicker Sebastian Janikowski. This would be Marshawn Lynch's return to football. After a promising 2-0 start, the Raiders would drop 4 straight games. Kind of shocking for a team that so many people expected to be in the upper echelon of the division and just the AFC in general this year. They rallied to beat the Chiefs, then they lost to the Bills, they beat the Dolphins, and they get crushed by the Patriots in Mexico City. They were sitting at 4-6 before 2 wins evened their season out at 6-6, but a horrible finish would see them drop 4 straight and finish at 6-10. After the season, the Raiders would fire their head coach.
The Los Angeles Chargers had a roller coaster of a season. They dropped their first 4 games to go quickly into a whole 0-4. 3 straight wins followed immediately by 2 straight losses put them at 3-6 with their back against the wall. They would win the next 4 games impressively, smashing the Bills 54-24, then beating the Cowboys, Browns, and Redskins. After a loss to the Chiefs, the Chargers sat at 7-7. Despite winning their last 2 games of the season and going 9-7, the Chargers would miss the playoffs due to a tiebreaker citing conference record. The Chargers would send 6 players to the Pro Bowl.
The winners of the AFC West was almost a given at the beginning of the season, until it wasn't. And then when it was all said and done, Kansas City did end up getting first in the division. The Chiefs would cut Jamal Charles and Jeremy Maclin heading into the season. In the draft, they would trade up to get quarterback Patrick Mahomes, and in the third, they picked up a running back from Toledo, Kareem Hunt. The Chiefs opened the season taking on the 2 future Super Bowl participants. First, they traveled to New England and easily dispatched of the Patriots, while Alex Smith threw for 4 touchdowns and rookie Kareem Hunt ran for 148 yards. Next up were the Eagles, who the Chiefs beat 27-20. Smith had 251 through the air, and Hunt had 81 on the ground. The Chiefs continued to roll with wins over the Chargers, the Redskins, and the Texans to up their record up to 5-0. The Chiefs were immediately talked about as being the best team in the NFL and destined to the Super Bowl. A loss to the Steelers, and then a painful last-second loss to the Raiders calmed the expectations down a tad, as the Chiefs were now 5-2. A 29-19 win over the rival Broncos got them back on track. Then 4 straight losses, some against some subpar teams, really changed a lot of people's views about this team. After falling to the Cowboys, the Giants, the Bills, and the Jets, the Chiefs stood at 6-6, very dismal for a team that had started out 5-0. Kansas City was very resilient. In the last 4 games of the year, they notched 4 victories over the Raiders, Chargers, Broncos, and Dolphins. This secured not only a division championship, but also a playoff spot. They would meet the Tennessee Titans at home in the opening round. The Chiefs were dominant in the first half against the Titans as they were up 21-3 at halftime. The Chiefs would not score at all in the second half. The Titans would score 3 touchdowns in the final 2 quarters and end what was a very promising season for the Chiefs.
We head to the AFC South and start with the Colts. Expectations were low heading into their season. Quarterback Andrew Luck was already injured and probably out for the year. This prompted the Colts to make a trade for New England's third-string Jacoby Brissett. The first game of the season saw an atrocious start by quarterback Scott Tolzien, who eventually would be replaced by Brissett, who would then start the rest of the year for the Colts. Indianapolis would win 2 of their first 5, getting wins over the 49ers and Browns. They would lose their next 3 before beating the Titans and then proceed to lose 6 straight before winning the last game of the season against that same Houston team. This was the Colts' first losing season since 2011.
The Houston Texans had an interesting story this year, and not in a good way, but interesting nonetheless. They started their season against the Jaguars and were getting crushed. At halftime, Coach Bill O'Brien decided to give their newly drafted rookie Deshaun Watson a chance. He wouldn't fare much better in terms of score, but outplayed the starter Tom Savage. Jaguars win 29-7. After the game, star linebacker Brian Cushing would be suspended 10 games for violating the NFL's PED policy. The rookie Watson would start their second week of the season and beat the Bengals 13-9. In Week 3, they had a very good effort in New England, coming up just short, 36-33. Week 4 saw an absolute offensive explosion against the Tennessee Titans as the Texans racked up 57 points, and the Houston fan base was rabid over rookie Deshaun Watson. The good fortune ended for the Texans in Week 5 against the Chiefs. Not only did they lose the game, but they lost 2 defensive stars for the season. Linebacker Whitney Merciless and defensive end J.J. Watt would suffer injuries during the game. Watt would still have a successful year off the field as he helped raise $37 million for the city of Houston as they were hit hard by flooding. He was named Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year and Walter Payton NFL Man of the Year. Week 6 saw Houston beat the Browns, and Week 8 saw them drop a tough, hard-fought game against Seattle. Before Week 9, impressive rookie Deshaun Watson would tear his ACL in practice and be lost for the year. The Texans reverted back to Tom Savage, who couldn't lead them to a victory that week. The Texans only mustered one more win for the rest of the season and ended up at 4-12.
The Tennessee Titans would go to the playoffs for the first time since 2008, despite only winning 2 of their first 5 games of the season. Weeks 6 through 10 saw success for the Titans, winning close games against the Browns, Ravens, and Bengals. A Week 11 blowout loss to the Steelers had Tennessee at 6-4. 20-16 win over the Colts, and then a 24-13 win over the Texans pushed their record to 8-4, and the Titans were setting pretty. That is until subsequent back-to-back losses occurred. Close, painful losses to the Cardinals, 49ers, and Rams left this team at 8-7 and desperately needing a win to assure them getting a playoff spot. That win would in fact come at the expense of the Jaguars, and just like that, the Titans clinched the number 5 spot. After a come-from-behind win in the first round against the Chiefs, where Mariota threw a touchdown pass to himself, the Titans had to travel to face New England. After scoring first, Tennessee did very little to stop New England from scoring and ended up losing 35-14 to end their season.
Last up in the AFC South is the Jacksonville Jaguars, who had a very strong defense throughout the entire NFL season. One big catalyst for this was the Jacksonville signing free agents A.J. Boye, Calais Campbell, and Barry Church before the season started. The Jaguars split their first 6 games before really finding their footing. 4 straight wins would follow, 3 of those wins being very dominant. Jacksonville would fall to 7-4 after a 3-point loss to Arizona. Weeks 13 through 15 saw Jaguar victories over the Colts 30-10, over the Seahawks 30-24, and then over the Texans 45-7. This put the Jaguars at 10-4 and clinched their first playoff berth since 2008. Even after dropping their final 2 games of the season, Jacksonville clinched the number 3 seed and had high expectations. Their first-round matchup against the Bills saw a low-scoring defensive struggle resulting in a win. Their second-round playoff game was quite the opposite. The Jaguars' offense was clicking and scoring at will against the Steelers, while their feared defense couldn't stop the opposition from answering back. At the end of this shootout, the Jaguars would ultimately prevail 45-42 over the Steelers and move on to the AFC Championship game against the New England Patriots. Up 17-10 going into the fourth quarter, the Patriots would rally with 2 late touchdowns to knock off the Jaguars 24-20, advancing the Patriots into another Super Bowl. We now jump back to the NFC side of things with the NFC North. The Chicago Bears shockingly signed Mike Glennon to a big contract. They turned around and traded several draft picks to move up and draft another quarterback in Mitchell Trubisky. 4 games into the season, the Bears were 1-3 under starter Mike Glennon. Things changed going into Week 5 against the Vikings. The Bears went with their rookie Trubisky to debut on Monday Night Football. In the end, they came up short by 3 points, and the Bears were now 1-4. Wins over the Ravens and Panthers boosted the team's spirits as they had a 3-4 record heading into their game against the Saints. They would lose this game 12-20 and go on to lose the next 4 after that, dropping them down to 3-9. They would split 2 of their last 4 games to finish 5-11. They would fire their head coach after his 3rd straight losing season.
The Green Bay Packers secured their first losing season since 2008. The fan base definitely didn't expect that result, as the beginning of the season started off very promising. 3 of their first 4 games of the season would be at home, and they took advantage of that, winning all the games, and the only blemish was the road game against the Atlanta Falcons. The Packers would travel to Dallas in Week 5 and get, at the time, a very high-profile victory, 35-31, and improve to 4-1. Next up was the game that really factored into their losing season. The Packers traveled to Minnesota, and that game, star quarterback Aaron Rodgers got tackled and broke his collarbone. Backup quarterback Brett Hundley would replace Rodgers and throw 3 interceptions, resulting in a 23-10 loss. Hundley would be the quarterback to start until Rodgers was deemed able to return. A loss to the Saints led into their bye week. After the break, they would lose at home to the Detroit Lions. They traveled to Chicago, and Brett Hundley strung together enough of a game to get the victory, but that only lasted 1 week as they would get shut out by the Ravens the following game. A tough 3-point loss had the Packers at 5-6 and in danger of having a lost season. But through adversity, the Packers would get back-to-back overtime victories over two of the NFL's worst teams in the Bucs and the Browns. This put hope back in the hearts of the fans as they were 7-6 and still mathematically in the playoff hunt. The next game proved crucial as they visit the Carolina Panthers. Whether you can argue that he was hurried back or not for the game was meaningless because Aaron Rodgers returned to play. He had 3 touchdowns. Unfortunately, he had 3 interceptions and the Packers lost by 7. They were now out of the playoff race and Rodgers would be shut down once again, this time for the entire season. Green Bay finished the year getting blown out by the Vikings and Lions and ended with a disappointing 7-9 record. The Detroit Lions started the year 2-0 going into Week 3. They were hosting the Falcons and driving for the win when a controversial call from the official arguably cost the Lions the game. Wide receiver Golden Tate was ruled down right before a touchdown, and then a 10-second runoff rule was implemented, and the convoluted finish resulted in a Lions loss and a 2-1 record. They would bounce back with a very good victory over the Vikings to go 3-1. 3 straight losses from future playoff teams, the Steelers, Saints, and Panthers, dropped Detroit down to 3-4. The next 3 games were should-win games, and in fact they did, beating the Packers, Browns, and Bears to bounce back to 6-4. They split the next 4 contests and were 8-6. On Christmas Eve, they would visit Cincinnati and suffer a crippling loss at the hands of a non-contender. With the 26-17 loss, the Lions were now out of playoff contention. Week 17, the Lions would take out their frustrations on the Packers by blowing them out 35-11 to end their season. Despite a winning record over the span of 4 seasons, Coach Jim Caldwell would be fired due to never winning a playoff game in that span. The Kings of the North this year were the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings started the year by going 2-2. The big stories in the first 4 games were the injury to their opening day starter, Sam Bradford, and a few games later, to their young upstart rookie star, Dalvin Cook. This left the Vikings to start the journeyman quarterback, Case Keenum. But everything was working out just fine for the Vikings as Keenum led them to 8 straight wins starting in Week 5, spanning through Week 13. A Week 14 loss to the Panthers didn't do much to deter the team as they easily won their final 3 games of the season to finish 13-3 and have a first-round bye in the playoffs. As I discussed earlier in the Saints recap, the Vikings did in fact win with a last-second pass in the game. It would be named the Minneapolis Miracle, and that allowed the Vikings to move on to face the number 1 seed Philadelphia Eagles. This game was a beating that started and never stopped as the eventual Super Bowl champion Eagles pummeled the Vikings 38-7. Keenum ended the year with over 3,500 yards passing and 22 touchdowns.
The AFC North is known for their rivalries and their hard-hitting football. For a while now, the Cleveland Browns haven't been able to withstand those punches, and this year was no different. Not a whole lot to say, so I won't waste anyone's time. They went 0-16, but 4 of those losses were by 3 points, so some games were close.
The cheap-shot Cincinnati Bengals had a disappointing year. They're usually expected to be in the conversation for the playoffs, but that wasn't the case this year. The Bengals did have an interesting draft class. They drafted one of the fastest men in John Ross. They drafted the best knockout artist in Joe Mixon, and they drafted kicker Jake Elliott. And after waiving him, he signed with the Eagles and did all right for himself. The Bengals opened up their season with 3 straight losses before bouncing back with 2 straight wins going into their bye week. They would drop 3 of their next 4 to go 3-6 and were already in deep trouble due to the success of the Ravens and Steelers. Things got streaky from here as they won 2, lost 3, and won 2 to finish their season at 7-9. 2 things to note that the Bengals can hang their hat on is the final 2 games they were able to win actually stopped and spoiled the chances of the Detroit Lions making the playoffs, and more importantly, ended the chances of division rival Baltimore Ravens from making the playoffs.
The Ravens were 4-5 entering their bye week and in need of a string of wins just to get in the race for the playoffs. Week 11, they beat the Packers 23-0. Week 12, they beat the Texans 23-16, and by Week 13, they beat the Lions 44-20. They climbed to 7-5 going into the big game against the Steelers. The Week 14 matchup saw the Ravens squander the lead late, and 19 fourth-quarter points by the Steelers helped them to a 39-38 win over the Ravens. The Ravens did in fact bounce back with wins over the Colts and Browns to set up a pivotal, must-win game in Cincinnati. and as heard previously, the Ravens ended up dropping a close one and missing the playoffs. The Steelers in the 2017 season would post their best record since 2004. It all started with wins over the Browns and Vikings before a head-scratching loss to the Bears in overtime in Week 3. Then, a win in Week 4, followed by a loss in Week 5, led them to a win streak that solidified the Steelers as serious contenders. 8 straight wins put them at 11-2 going into an important matchup against the Patriots, one that would probably allow them to finish first in the conference by year's end. The well-played back-and-forth game saw the Pats score 11 fourth-quarter points to win by 3, but what was really being talked about after the game was a call by the refs nullifying a touchdown caught by Jesse James. This was actually my personal favorite game of the season. The Steelers would go on to finish the season 13-3 after 2 final regular season wins. Their first and only playoff game of the season saw a very explosive Jaguars team come in and hang 45 points on the Steelers. The Steelers rallied, down having dug a big hole early, but still fell short by 3 points.
We head to the final division in the AFC and talk about the East. The New York Jets, as expected, lost their first 2 games. What wasn't expected was how they would respond. They would beat the Dolphins, Jaguars, and Browns in succession to get above 500 and go 3-2. Then 3 hard-fought close losses to the Patriots, Falcons, and Dolphins dropped the fan excitement once again. A win at the Bills wasn't celebrated for long due to back-to-back losses following the triumph. A shocking win against the Chiefs put the Jets at 5-7. The very next week, after quarterback Josh McCown won the AFC Offensive Player of the Week, he would break his hand in a game against the Denver Broncos that they would go on to lose 23-0. The final 3 games of the season also resulted in losses, and the once surprising Jets became relegated to what was expected, a 5-11 record and the last place in the division. The Miami Dolphins started their season watching from home due to Hurricane Irma. That meant they would have to play 16 consecutive games to end the season. In August, after the Dolphins lost their starting quarterback Ryan Tannehill due to injury, they reached out to Jay Cutler and coaxed him out of retirement. He was all set to become a commentator. First game with Cutler was a success, knocking off the Chargers to go 1-0. Things would quickly fall off for Miami as they would get beaten handily in the next 2 games by the Jets and Saints. The highlight of their season came next as the Dolphins scored 3 straight victories to go 4-2. But in the win against the Jets, Cutler got a rib injury and would miss the next game, which ended up being a 40-0 loss against the Ravens. Cutler's return didn't bring positive results as they would lose the next 3. He would miss the Patriots game due to a concussion, and they would go on to lose 35-17. This put them at 4-7. Cutler would again return from injury, but this time his presence wielded very positive results as they beat his former team, the Broncos, 35-9, and they avenged their previous loss to the Patriots, 27-20. At 6-7, there was still hope, but they would need to win their next 3. But instead, lackluster play caused them to actually lose their final 3 games and put them at 6-10. The Buffalo Bills, they had an interesting season, to say the least. You couldn't tell if they wanted to make the playoffs or if they were trying to sabotage themselves into a losing season. The Bills made a handful of trades over the course of the season, and a few notable ones were trading Sammy Watkins to the Rams, trading Ronald Darby to the Eagles. I'm sure he thanks them for that. And then acquiring Kelvin Benjamin from the Panthers on Halloween. The Bills were 3-2 going into their Week 6 bye. Wins over the Bucs and Raiders had Buffalo setting pretty at 5-2. It was after this when the Bills had a 3-game skid and things got interesting, or at least the coaching decisions did. After a Week 10 blowout loss to the Saints, the Bills coach came out and said that current starter Tyrod Taylor would ride the pine while rookie quarterback Nathan Peterman got the start. Tyrod Taylor might not be very good, and he might be overpaid, but he's the best shot they had. Against the Chargers, Nathan Peterman was atrocious. He went 6 of 14 for 66 yards and threw 5 interceptions. The Bills would reinsert Tyrod Taylor for the second half, but the damage was done, and the Chargers trounced the Bills 54-24. Taylor would have the job back as a starter the next week as they snapped their losing streak with a win over the Chiefs. The Bills were now 6-5. The following week against New England, Taylor would be carted off the field and replaced by the interception sensation Peterman. New England won 23-3. Taylor would have to set out the next week against the Colts, while Peterman replaced him once again. This was the infamous Snow Bowl and was an obviously poorly played game that LaShawn McCoy saved for the Bills as they won 13-7 in overtime. Taylor would return permanently for the season and lead the Bills to a 9-7 season, and shockingly, due to the tiebreakers, the Bills would snap an 18-year drought and make the playoffs. They would lose in the first round to the Jaguars while only scoring 3 points.
We will skip over the Patriots for now and get to them later as we move to the NFC East. Probably the most underachieving team of the year goes to the Giants. A lot of experts predicted a Super Bowl appearance for the team, and that was a ways off. Injuries did play a factor, as for one example, the Giants did lose their top 3 receivers on their depth chart due to injury. But something shocking and inexplicable happened later in the season. Going into Week 13, the Giants were 2-9 and obviously going nowhere. The season was lost for sure, but Coach Ben McAdoo told the team he was going to play the reserves, play some new faces, and that sounds all fair and well. There was one small kind of actually big thing that should have stopped this thought process. Their starting quarterback, Eli Manning, who has won 2 Super Bowls as a starter, has not missed a game since November of 2004. That's 210 consecutive games started. The coach gave Manning the option to start the game to keep the streak alive, but said he would be pulling Manning for Geno Smith eventually as the contest went on. Manning declined, saying he didn't want to start and not finish the game, so against the Raiders on Week 13, the streak was snapped. One other interesting thing to note is the Giants were the last team in the NFL to start an African-American at quarterback. Geno Smith fumbled twice, the Giants lost, and the owners fired both Ben McAdoo and the GM after the game. Eli Manning would return as the starter to fire up another streak. Giants finished 3-13.
The Washington Redskins still have a supposed racist team name, and they still suck. They had one of, if not the most, injuries in the league this year. Over 65 players reportedly injured. Kirk Cousins is overpaid and inconsistent. The offensive line was decimated all year long, and I doubt many people could even name their wide receiver. This is my lifelong favorite team, and I did in fact watch every snap of every game. 7-9. Now let's move on. The Dallas Cowboys. Ezekiel Elliott battled and appealed his 6-game suspension deep into the season and then finally had to succumb to it. Tony Romo is long gone and actually very good at his new gig. I can't stand the Cowboys, and just as I'm not talking about my favorite team, I can't get myself to talk about my most hated team. So sorry, Dallas, 9-7, no playoffs. Now we're going to end the show talking about the 2 teams that participated in the Super Bowl. We start with the AFC champion New England Patriots. The Patriots did their typical changing up of the roster, most notably trading for Brandon Cooks and then getting Stephon Gilmore. A huge blow to their offense came in the preseason when Julian Edelman was injured and missed the whole upcoming season. The Patriots would also trade away every quarterback not named Tom Brady. Brissett to the Colts, Garoppolo to the 49ers. No one is safe on the Patriots. Their season didn't start as planned as they got shocked at home against the Chiefs, and the talk of Brady's age immediately came to the forefront. After wins over the Saints and Texans, New England would lose again to the Panthers, evening their record at 2-2. Defensive troubles marred the Patriots early on in the season, and it was around Game 5 when they subsided and the defensive play got better. 8 straight wins culminating in a 23-3 victory over the Bills had the Patriots at 10-2. The Bills game was most notable due to the cheap shot that Rob Gronkowski took on a Bills defender as he laid face flat, resulting in a concussion. Week 14 was another shocking loss, this time to the Dolphins. All would end well, though, as the Pats won their last 3 games of the season, improving to 13-3 and nabbing the number 1 seed. A slow start, but an absolute great finish for the team. Their first playoff game was against an outmatched Titans team, and they easily dispatched them 35-14. Next round was against a scrappy Jacksonville team who took New England to the limit but fell short 24-20. That win booked New England for a second straight Super Bowl appearance. Quarterback Tom Brady is now the oldest quarterback to win a playoff game, and the Patriots are the first NFL franchise to play in 10 Super Bowls.
The Philadelphia Eagles of the NFC East became NFC Conference champions and would face the Patriots. Prior to the season, the Eagles made several trades and signings to shore up their roster. Some of the most notable signings were Torrey Smith, Alshon Jeffrey, Chance Warmack, Chris Long, LeGarrette Blount, and coming over from the Chiefs and returning to the Eagles, a man named Nick Foles. They would open the season going 1-1. The Eagles then looked virtually unstoppable as they reeled off 9 straight wins before a loss at Seattle finally slowed them down. The Eagles were now at 10-2. Going into Week 14, the Eagles were plagued with a few injuries, but nothing like the one the team would suffer in the Rams game. Star quarterback Carson Wentz, who is at 33 touchdowns on the season, left, and later it was revealed he tore his ACL and was out for the year. Nick Foles would be his replacement. The Eagles did win the game against the Rams in a shootout, 43-35. Foles would lead the team to victories in the next 2 games before the Eagles mainly sat out the starters and lost the last game of the regular season. Philadelphia would be 13-3 entering the playoffs. The Eagles relied on their defense to defeat the Falcons in the first playoff game, winning 15-10. In the NFC Championship, they would face off and obliterate the Minnesota Vikings 38-7 to set up their Super Bowl appearance. The Eagles entered the Super Bowl against the Patriots as almost 5-point underdogs. Their offense was unstoppable, and with the help of guts and trick plays, the Eagles would defeat the New England Patriots 41-33 and get a very first Super Bowl win in their 85-year history. Nick Foles would be named the Super Bowl MVP.
Okay, so the Super Bowl 53 betting odds as of this recording has the New England Patriots plus 500 to make it back and win. The Eagles are second at plus 700. The Green Bay Packers, as long as Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, they're at plus 800. And depending on who the Steelers get back, because remember, still early, this is at the time of the recording, is at plus 1,000.